so much use of the facilities, and that's the way Jewish life has run for decades. So a lot of people depend on a small number of very generous people like Bernie Madoff, who was a formidable philanthropist. And then here in LA, we have another growing scandal with Esri Numvar, who's a leading member of the Persian Jewish community here in Los Angeles, whose real estate operation went broke, leaving people out of millions of dollars, and they're trying to figure out what happened. And Esri Numvar is a formidable philanthropist in Los Angeles life and in Israel, and Jews are very prominent in the world of finance and in real estate and in banking, and all these things have taken massive drops in value over the past year, and so Jewish philanthropy is stumbling. Jewish day schools are hurting. Synagogues are often struggling because we're not dominant in the oil industry. We have our areas of dominance, and we're disproportionately successful in finance and real estate.
Well, let's. This is kind of a very interesting insight into this man's psyche. That while he was, by all accounts, a crook, he was also very philanthropic, which sort of, to me, the guy stealing from the bank isn't usually the guy that's, giving to, I don't know, it just seems there's a Robin Hood nature to what this story is, though I don't think he thought of himself as some kind of a Robin Hood. He wasn't taking from the wealthy to give to the poor, but he certainly did give a lot of money to philanthropic enterprises and causes. What do you suspect that's all about?
Well, I think part of it is kind of the dark side of what has kept Jews a distinct culture that has survived as minority status for thousands of years. For thousands of years, we've kind of defined ourselves against the majority culture. So when I was a Christian, I was raised a Christian, lived that way for my first 18 years, you didn't hear Christians competing about who's more Christian. But once I started getting into Judaism, there's this constant competition about who's more Jewish, and the things that set you off and make you more Jewish than other Jews is observing distinctive, almost tribal rituals or support for the tribe or the inner group as opposed to concern with the majority culture. So I was talking just in therapy today that there's my inner world, which is the world that I live within Orthodox Judaism, the people that I celebrate the holidays with and go to synagogue with, and then there's everyone else. And so one of the dark sides of a very tight sense of Jewish community is that if you're primarily invested, as I am, within my very tight community, everyone else outside of that is not as important.
Well, there's a tribal nature to all religion, no doubt.
Yeah.
But I've never heard that term, I'm more Jewish than you. You say that's something, and I grew up in the Valley, and most of my friends were, I'd say half of my friends were Jewish. My parents are both Jews. I've never heard anyone use that term, I'm more Jewish. You hear that?
Did you ever hear anyone, one Jew call another Jew a goy? I mean, that's pretty common, and that's just an example of it. Look, you're a goy because you eat treif.
I haven't heard that, but it probably would have been said to me because that's right. I mean, my parents are Jewish, but we had a Christmas tree in our house, so at this time of year. And I have 3 brothers, and only one of us married a Jewish woman. So that tells you how important the religion was to us growing up. But I've never. You hear that term a lot. You hear people say you're not that.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, particularly in Orthodox life, and particularly in traditional Jewish life, I think Dennis Prager sums it up best when he describes this mindset as any Jew who keeps one more mitzvah, one more commandment, one more ritual, more than I do is a fanatic, and any Jew who keeps one less mitzvah commandment than I do is a goy. So there's this constant notion of, are you acting like a goy or are you acting like a Jew? And the things that distinguish you as a Jew from your fellow Jews are ritual laws. I mean, you're not accused of acting like a Gentile if you're particularly charitable or upright or honest. It's always, do you wear your your fringes out? Do you pray every day at synagogue? Do you learn a page of Talmud every day? Do you know all the blessings by heart, and do you say them before you have a drink of water or eat an apple, etc.? So it's these ritual observances that kind of distinguish you as being more Jewish than those who are more lax.
Well, is it possible that this is just something that comes from Orthodoxy, that because you're so involved in Orthodox Judaism, that maybe you're exposed to something that I never would see not being Orthodox?
It's certainly much more intense. Orthodoxy is the burning, red-hot core of Jewish life. Mm-hmm. And so it's much more intense. But, I mean, you would have Jewish gangsters who were a Cohen, meaning a descendant of a priest, who would not set foot in a cemetery. So these were people who were killing other people for their work, and yet they maintained this millennia-old custom that a Kohen, a Jewish priest, should not set foot in a cemetery. I mean, there were people in the porn industry who would keep varying degrees of kosher. So obviously, pornography is not the Jewish thing. It's condemned by all religion according to Judaism. But even Jews in the pornography industry, to some degree, would keep aspects of the Jewish tradition. It's kind of difficult to throw it all away. So in the Soviet Union, in the very beginning, so about 80 years ago, there are stories about Jews who would keep a copy of Karl Marx and a copy of Maimonides. So it's hard to throw away 3,000 years of Jewish tradition, even if your parents and you decide to become secular. You don't just lose the whole thing.
So if I were having a conversation about this news story with a journalist who was, let's say, a Christian, and he was focusing on the Jewish aspect of this guy's last name, this guy who was investing with him, I would say there's a subtle subtext to what he was saying, as implying that this is just sort of this old canard about Jews and money, right? But you're saying the same thing, and I'm wondering if you like when you first heard this story and heard his name had Bernard Madoff is a very Jewish sounding name. And then you find out that it's Mort Zuckerman, it's Elie Wiesel, it's Steven Spielberg. You hear all these names. Do you cringe when you hear this, or are you kind of rubbing your hands together saying yes?
Oh, I cringe. It's obviously bad for the Jews. It makes us look bad. This is someone deeply involved in Jewish life and deeply supported by his fellow Jews, particularly the most successful Jews, the most public Jews. This is all very, very bad for the Jews.
Well, specifically, it's bad for many Jews because they were invested with him, and as you mentioned when we started off, saying that there are a lot of charities, Jewish charities, that rely on this money from these holdings, from these, what are they called, these funds,
funds.
Well, not just hedge funds, but they're philanthropic funds that are set aside that live off the interest from someone's benevolent gift. And the fact that they can't do that, it has a tremendous impact for the Jewish community. Like you were talking about, Jewish schools that may not be able to function. I imagine that there are synagogues that will also be similarly impacted. Yeah,
there are 2 Jewish charities that are shut down immediately because they've been totally wiped out.
Wow.
But also there's no group that only has good qualities. So when you hear that someone's accused of murder, you're very surprised if his name is Cohen. But if you hear that someone's accused of white-collar crime on Wall Street, you're a little surprised if his name isn't Jewish.
I'm not sure. I mean, if you think about the people who have been involved, for example, with all these scandals with the subprime mortgage, it's a lot of guys don't sound like Jews to me. The guys who were running Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae and Warren Buffett, and I don't know, Warren Buffett's not involved in any shenanigans, but I mean, these are not